starting. Hi, this is Circe Olson Woessner. I'm the director of the Museum of the American Military Family in Tijeras, New Mexico, and this is our podcast, At Ease. I'm speaking today with a very interesting person. He's a brat and an author of many books. He just completed a book called Back in the DDR, and I'd like to welcome Rick Kaempfer to the show today. Hi, Rick.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Hey, so before we get started, I just have to say, when I first read the title, it reminded me of the Beatles' Back in the USSR song. Was that your inspiration for choosing that title, Back in the
Y-
DDR?
yes, it was. I'm a big Beatles fan.
Cool. And then I noticed that each chapter had a Beatles-inspired heading, like a paper bag was on my knee. And like you said, I'm a big Beatles fan too, so I thought it
Well,
was.
I'm glad you caught that because not many people have caught that. And in fact, the thing that I've discovered is, saying back in the DDR, to me, that was a very obvious reference. But DDR is something that younger people don't even know what that means. So I
Yeah.
have to explain it all the time, which perhaps was not the greatest idea for a title.
No, I think it's cool. I mean, it's definitely captured history. So getting back to being a Beatles fan, I love the
Yeah.
Beatles. I do. And I don't think they age. Like some music is dated. They don't ever seem to be dated. Now, I don't know if that's prejudice because I like them or whether they truly are transcendent of all ages and eras.
I think you're right about that, and the proof is that it's multi-generational, right? So I'm
Mm.
born in 1963, the year that the Beatles really became popular in England. I was born that year, and I still became a huge Beatles fan. My kids, who were born in the 90s or the O's,
Mm-mm.
are also huge Beatles fans. So it's something. There's something about their music that is transcendent. You're absolutely right.
So did you ever see them in concert?
I never saw the Beatles, but I did see. I've seen Paul McCartney probably 7 or 8 times. I've seen Ringo several times. I met Ringo. I interviewed George Martin for a radio show that I do here in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's a big part of my life.
Oh, cool. Um, well, now that we have that out of the way, tell us a little bit about your childhood. How did your parents meet, and when did your dad join the U.S. military? And was he Army?
So my parents met in Chicago. They're both German immigrants. So in Chicago is a very insular city. Uh, every neighborhood is what, especially in that time, was ethnic. I
Mhm.
lived in the German neighborhood, which was
Uh,
near the Polish neighborhood, which was near, et cetera, the Irish neighborhood.
uh,
In fact, I'll tell you how insular it was. My parents were both Germans, but they were from different parts of Europe. So therefore, they did not interact. It was like a big scandal when they started dating each other. So even within the German community, it was like, yeah, that's what Chicago was like.
well, we actually had a friend that lived in the Ukrainian village in Chicago for a while.
Yeah,
So we went to visit. It was like literally stepping off into Europe. So
right.
yeah,
That's what
that's
it was
kind of
like.
cool. That's kind of
Yeah.
cool. Okay, so besides Chicago, where all did you live growing up? And we always ask this of everybody. What was your favorite place and why? And also your least favorite place and why?
Okay. Well, my Army brat life is probably a little bit different in that I didn't. I grew up in Chicago. My dad was at that time a civilian working for the Department of Defense in the Corps of Engineers.
Mm.
And so I only had two tours as an Army brat. One was in Frankfurt. We lived in Camp King Oberursel, which was outside of Frankfurt. And then the other one was in Heidelberg. So those are the only two places I lived other than Chicago. And
Oh,
I loved both of them. So I
yeah.
don't have a least favorite place.
I know I can find something great in every place we've ever been stationed. So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, from reading the descriptions in the back of your book that separate the truth from the fiction, I gather your dad and mom wanted to expose you to as many cultural opportunities when you were living in different places. Is that true? And then, if so, what did you do as a family or on your own to learn about your host nation?
So yes, it's totally true. My parents wanted me to experience everything. And what was funny in retrospect, I was like 13, 14, 15, that age when we lived over there. And you can see me at, say, the Eiffel Tower, and I have this teenager expression on my face, like,
Yep.
it's the Eiffel
Yeah,
Tower,
I
oh,
hate
oh, I'm in Rome.
it. Yeah, yeah.
But the thing about my family was my father was an extrovert who loved people. And when we first moved to Germany, he just started calling relatives and that he had never met. And so virtually every weekend in Germany, we either were visiting relatives or they were visiting us.
Mm,
So we were meeting, locals
mm, mm,
every single weekend.
mm, mm, mm. Yeah, I have similar stories. My parents dragged me all over Europe, and I
Uh,
remember having my nose in a Nancy Drew book for most of the trips. It's like I don't remember like what it was like at the catacombs, but I sure remember what Nancy Drew was doing on Shadow Ranch.
yeah.
So
Isn't
it's
that funny?
yeah.
I have a memory of sitting outside the Tower of Pisa.
Mm,
We were listening to Armed Forces Radio, and Casey Kasem was doing the countdown, and we
mm.
were just about to get to number one. And my dad's like, "Come on, we're here at the Leaning Tower of Pisa." I'm like, "No, Dad, I've got to find out what's number one at the American Top 40."
Exactly. So military life for kids has evolved over the years, but there are similarities across the generations. When you think back on your childhood as a brat in the 70s, and not specifically about the incidences that you portray in this book, what are
Mhm.
some of your favorite brat moments?
To me, I told you my background, my insular Chicago background. To me, the when I think about being a brat, an army brat,
Mm,
is that how friendly everybody is and how you're forced to become friendly immediately,
mm,
making friends, within seconds of meeting people. That was a totally new experience for me.
mm,
In Chicago, people don't even say hello, when you're
right,
walking down the street. And then you
right.
go to first day of school. I remember my first day walking home from school, there was a kid standing, just standing there. And I walked by and I said, "Hey, what are you doing?" He goes, "I'm waiting for you." I'm like, "Oh, we've never met." And he said, "Yeah, my dad works with your dad, and he, we're the same age, so we're gonna be friends." Like, "Oh, okay."
Wow, that's
I
it. That
just thought
is a little
that
story.
was cool. I had never
Yeah.
experienced anything like that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, we know other brats have similar experiences. They talk about the friendly, the ease of making friends, and the ease of getting rid of friends. I mean, not getting rid of them, but
Yeah,
leaving
well, you have
them.
to,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. So, did you ever have any really scary moments personally as a brat?
Well, yeah, but those are the ones that are in the book, right?
Uh,
There, the visiting East Germany
uh,
was terrifying.
mm,
There were the bombing. There
yeah,
was a story about a bombing at the Officers Club
right,
in
right.
Frankfurt. Lots of things like that, and we had regular bomb threats when I
Mm,
was in school,
mm, mm,
uh,
mm.
junior high and high school. It was a regular thing because the Bader Meinhof gang were kind of running rampant in Germany at that time,
Right,
and
right,
it was a
right.
normal thing. It was like, oh, another bomb threat.
I think my mother actually, she taught first grade in Karlsruhe, and I think she actually brought her students to the house one day because of a bomb.
Wow,
She just brought the class home. That may be something I'm totally imagining, but I think she did.
wow.
So you kind of talked about this because you had cousins overseas, but one of the things I found the hardest for me was growing up only seeing my cousins every once in a while and my grandparents too. And so I know you lived in Germany for a while, you had family, but when
Yeah.
your family moved to Chicago, how did they handle staying in touch with their family in Germany when they were on the opposite ends of the earth from them? And how do you think that intergenerational interaction or lack thereof shaped you?
Well, so they didn't stay in touch very well at all with their relatives in Germany, and that I kind of write about that a little bit in the book about meeting people for the first time who are very close relatives of my parents. Um, but the thing that was hardest for me is that my grandparents and I were very close. We lived in the same building in Chicago,
Mm-mm,
and being away from them for 6 years, that was very difficult.
mm-mm,
They visited us twice, and those are like my fondest memories of our time there is when they came and visited us.
yeah,
It was just impossible in those days. Long distance phone calls cost a fortune. You
right.
didn't just pick up the phone and call. You wrote letters. Kids
Mm.
want to look this up. This is something people used to do. They write letters and put stamps on them and send them. It was hard to stay in touch.
So I feel, especially as I get older and more nostalgic, how acutely I missed out on a lot of things that I should have experienced with my grandparents. I regret that I can't ask stories about what it was like growing up in 1904, and
Right.
I understand that. And I sometimes as an adult feel like I was cheated out of a childhood.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, but switching gears, talking back about your dad. So one of your dad's jobs was designing or building the American school in Heidelberg. So can you tell our listeners a little bit about that? I know they're going to be very interested in that.
Yeah, so my dad was in charge of the project that built the middle school in Heidelberg, which was in Patrick Henry Village. And it opened in 1976. I happened to be one of the first classes of that school. But it was kind of I remember it was a kind of difficult school to maneuver. It was kind of a fancy design. And my dad, even when he brought me to school and he designed the school, he couldn't find his way around the hallways. That was my memory of it.
That's kind of interesting. But I think it's so cool to have tangible proof of your part of influencing history for thousands of students. Just think
Yeah,
about how many people learned and lived and loved and grew up in those buildings. It's great to be able to say, I did that. I'm sure
yeah,
he
I
never
know.
said that though.
No, he was a very humble guy, but I must admit I was proud. I was proud of him that that was one of his accomplishments.
So switching gears, I know you've written several books. Did you always want to be a writer?
I always wanted to be a writer, yes, but I didn't legitimately think I had a chance at it until I worked in radio for 20 some years.
Mm,
And in radio, I was basically a comedy writer. I wrote for, wacky radio shows,
mm,
and I was writing every day, but I wasn't, you know, writing for publication.
mm,
And I wasn't sure that I had the chops to do it. And then I got hired to do some magazine articles, and I figured out that I could write. And I
mm,
wrote my first book, and I figured out that people liked my writing, and so that's how it happened. It kind of happened organically.
mm. Was there anybody who influenced you the most to put down your words on paper, or when you finally said, "I'm going to be a writer," I said that too, and people just said, "Yeah, right." You'll never make any money. Writing doesn't pay. Go ahead, comma queen.
Yeah.
Did you have somebody who influenced and encouraged you?
Uh, yes, I had a teacher in at Heidelberg High School named Mrs. Moore,
Uh-huh.
who she was the first one that saw that I had some writing talent.
Mm,
But I always uh, kept notebooks and wrote, and because I was a very introverted kid,
mm.
um, I always put my thoughts down. This is why I'm a comedy writer and not a comedian.
Right,
I'm not
right,
a performer. I'm the guy who hands the funny note to the comedian,
right,
who
right.
then gets
No,
the laughs.
I understand because people always think I'm this great extrovert, and they're like, if we're on a cruise ship, go up on stage. Oh, heck, no, I would
Yeah,
rather not.
right. And same with radio. Radio, you're in a room by yourself. People think, "Oh my God, you're on the radio every day. That must be, you must be an extrovert." But no, you're sitting in a room with a microphone. It's a very solitary experience.
Mm, mm, mm. So you mentioned the notebooks. This whole book has descriptions and settings in historic events like, when I read it, it was like coming home to me. You mentioned Bouvier Hall at
Yeah.
the University of Maryland. I lived there. And in Heidelberg, well, I lived there too. The Frankfurt O Club bombing. Well, I have a story about that, but we won't get into it. The Baader-Meinhof gang. I mean, so many people have experienced these places and historic events.
Right.
The duty train. You write the details so well, and I
Well,
knew
thank you.
exactly what you meant and where you were. I could even relate to when you described the chunky milk. Um, I hadn't thought about that in almost 50 years. Oh, I hadn't thought about it in 50 years, but
Yeah.
I can describe it and I can feel it in my mouth
Mhm.
even now.
Yeah.
So there's so much that's relatable. And so in your book, the kid, Rudy, he carries a notebook with him. Kind of
Yeah.
like what was that book? Harriet the Spy. She always
Yeah.
carried a notebook.
Yeah.
Reading the book and the descriptions of the locations, they're so detailed and specific. And I was wondering, and I think you just said that did you carry a notebook like Rudy? Did you literally document that kind of stuff?
I did. Yeah. I found it um I kept track of all the different countries. I think we went to like 21 different countries or something like that. I kept
Mhm.
track of all of that. I kept track of little things that I noticed in those countries just for my own, personal knowledge. And I've always been kind of an observer of people. So
Mhm.
whenever I saw something that I thought was interesting, I would jot it down.
Mhm.
I've done it my whole life. It was unusual when I was a
Uh-uh.
kid. It was
Yeah.
really unusual, but I found that it certainly has helped me over the years.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I'd been journaling since I was 12, and for some reason we've PCS'd a lot. We've moved we moved 18 times in 20 years.
Oh, wow.
All those journals went with me. And so I
Yeah.
can go all the way back to about age 13. But
Wow.
I wasn't documenting historical things like the Baader-Meinhof gang. I was documenting, things important to me, like, my friends and stuff. But I think it's cool. And like you said, it paid off because this book was like smooth. Right off the bat, as I started reading, you had me hooked with the opening scene. Rudy's sister is headed to the University of Maryland in Munich. I
Yep.
attended there 2 years. I've done several books on the UMMC experience. Did you attend UMMC?
I didn't, but I had a lot of friends that did. So
Oh.
I graduated high school in 1981.
Mhm.
And I went back to Germany a few times and visited my friends, and they had all gone to that school. And
Mm-mm.
so I was on that campus, many times. So I
Okay.
knew it well.
So that's how you knew about the campus and the student activities at that time.
Yes.
I was
Yes.
actually there in 81. I was there from 79 to 81. So
Wow.
we might have mutual acquaintances, but that's for a
That's
different
funny.
time and place. I
Well,
told you.
there are a couple of stories that happen in the book uh, where there are certain types of parties that the sister
Mhm.
goes to. I had those in my notes. I literally wrote those down. I saw signs on the wall for a Rocky Horror Picture Show
Yep, yep.
party. I thought, oh, that's cool, and I wrote it down. That's where I got that stuff from.
That's pretty cool. That's cool. So when you were writing this book, did you worry that you might bore some military connected readers or lose some civilian readers with your references?
Yeah.
I sometimes wonder if we tend to over explain when we write our military memoirs. It's like, how do you balance inserting camp such and such or mentioning stars and stripes in AFN and explaining what it is, or avoid making it sound like it's product placement, um,
Yeah.
or just telling the story without the educational insertions. It must be a fine balance.
Well, that's such a great question. That is a good writer's question right there. Um, that was very hard. And I think I came down on the side of I'm probably going to have more readers that don't know that much about the military than those that do. So I came down more on over explaining in certain cases, than under explaining. So it was a tough balance. I'm not sure I accomplished it correctly or not, but that was that was constantly in my mind. That's such a great question.
Yeah. Well, and I also struggle with that when I'm writing a memoir piece or something for a blog, because it when I did read some of the things jarred. It's like, I already know that. But then I
Yeah,
realized that some people don't know that, right?
right, exactly.
But I think it worked in your case. It worked.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, there was I liked this book. Okay, but I don't endorse anything. So
Okay,
anyway,
that's
um,
fine.
but so I wanted to ask, what was your process for writing the fictional parts? Say, like how the secret police operated, or what was in the files about your family, because that was fiction, right?
That was fiction, but my father did work. Well, he was in the Corps of Engineers, but he also did a lot of translating work for generals. And because he was German, he spoke fluent German, so he did a lot. He was in Brussels a lot at NATO headquarters,
Mhm.
and we often had these big, high-ranking generals come over to our house for dinner. And I never thought anything of it when I was a kid. It never occurred to me that there could be something else going on there. And it wasn't until I started writing this book and I started researching it and found out, the places that we stayed, when we were there, when the headquarters for, the intelligence moved, it
Mhm.
happened to be exactly at the exact time that we moved. I started thinking, well, maybe he was somehow involved in that. He's been gone for 30 years, so I can't ask him.
Mhm.
Um, and so I did research. And as I'm doing research, my wife jokes about it because I have a Amazon Prime account, and I
Mhm.
watched every Nazi film, and I watched every East German film, and now when it has uh, suggestions for you,
Right,
it
right,
looks
right.
like I'm a Nazi or something because all the
All
choices
the
are.
research. Yeah, yeah.
So I did a ton of research in that, and then I found out that there probably is a Stasi file about my family because of our visit to East Germany. And there were spies following us the whole time. And it's something that is stuck in my mind all these years.
Hmm.
And so next time I go there, I am gonna, look it up to see if I can find out even more. But that was the inspiration.
Interesting, because I know that when we were in Bulgaria, we always felt like we were being watched and
Yeah.
followed too.
And you were. And you were because you're Americans.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, how did you end up in radio and publishing?
So I went to college to be a journalist. And then I discovered advertising, and I got my degree in advertising.
Hmm.
But I only did that to please my father because it sounded more like a real business. But when I was in college, I started doing college radio, and they told me I had a good voice, so I I followed that, and you know that was I just kind of fell into it, and I loved it. I love radio. I did it for 25 years.
Hmm. Hmm.
But then, radio's kind of on its way out. And I saw the writing on the wall years ago. And so then I stayed home and wrote with my kids. And I could watch my kids. I got a job writing a humor column about my kids,
Ah,
which was awesome. If you spend your whole life looking for the funny in life, you're going to be a happy person. And that's basically what I did for 10 years. And in the process of writing that, I discovered that I had a knack for this, and I started publishing books, and then I got my own publishing company, and that's where I am right now.
that's cool. Your kids must cringe though when they read some of those columns. I bet you told the whole thing, the whole truth. And so now if they're squeamish or embarrassed, it's your fault, Dad.
Well, yeah, luckily they kind of like it.
Okay.
Uh, I was worried about that because they're both. Oh, I've got three boys, and
Mm-mm,
they're introverts mostly,
mm-mm,
but they kind of like the attention, to be honest with you.
mm-mm.
People would recognize their names and stuff and go up and say hello to them. They thought that was weird, but
Celebrity kids.
yeah, exactly.
So we have many writers in our audience. What kind of books does your company, Eckhartz Press, publish? And are you actively looking for writers to submit works right now?
Yeah, always. We're always looking for writers. Um, we have, we basically are a Chicago publishing company, so we uh, tend to focus on Chicago authors and Chicago stories.
Mhm.
But if there's a good story, we're always up for it. Like for instance, my book is not a Chicago story at all, um, even though I'm a Chicago author. So I'll stretch it. This is my company, so I can do whatever I want.
But it did mention Chicago, so
It
there.
did mention Chicago, and I kind of put that in there on purpose because of that.
Um, I just thought of something. What was your dad's official MOS? What was his official job title?
I don't know. I don't know what his
Oh.
official title was. He was a GS 15, I think, when he
Hmm.
retired.
Hmm.
Whatever that, I think that's equivalent to a one-star general or something like that.
Yeah. So, wow, you really didn't know. That's interesting because it kept saying engineer, but or whatever it
He
said.
never talked about it. That was the thing. He never talked about it. And when we asked him questions, he just didn't answer them. It was one of the reasons why I was always suspicious about what he did.
Yeah, that is interesting. So, in the few minutes we have left, what would you like our listeners to know that I didn't cover? And I guess one thing is where can they buy the book, but what else? What else would you like them to know?
Well, all right. The book is at eckhartzpress.com, ECKHARTZ press.com.
Mhm.
By the way, the company name Eckhart is named after my dad. His first name was Eckhart.
Mm,
Um,
mm,
and so, and my co-publisher's father's first name was Fritz, and so it's kind of a combination of the two.
uh-huh.
Um, but if I'll just say this about it: the story is an adventure.
Mhm.
It's a coming of age story, but it's an adventure. You get to tour Europe and see all sorts of interesting sights, and hopefully you'll have fun along the way.
Well, it's been fun having this little interview today, and I wanted to thank you for taking the time to talk with me.
Thank you.
I'll put a link to the to your book at the bottom of our post, and also to Eckhart's Press.
And
Um,
can I say one other thing
uh-huh.
about military families?
Mhm,
Because I know that's a passion of yours.
mhm.
I just want to say thank you to all the military people that I met over the years. You have no idea what an impact you made on my life and how much you helped me come out of my shell. And I will be forever grateful.
Well, thank you on behalf of all the families out there, all those moms that were the moms for the entire neighborhood of the kids in
Yep.
the housing area for sure. Um, so I'm assuming you're going to answer this next question correctly.
Uh-oh. Okay.
Cubs or White Sox?
It's Cubs.
All
I'm
right.
sorry.
All
It's
right.
Chicago Cubs. I
You know,
wrote a book called Every Cub Ever. It's about every single player who ever played for the Cubs. So I'm a big Cubs fan.
oh wow. So my dad actually got to try out and play on the Cubs farm team for a little bit back in
Wow.
I don't know, the late 40s, early 50s. He knew he wasn't going to make it, but he
Yeah.
spent some time, just
Wow,
yeah.
that's impressive.
Yeah, yeah. So of course he's a lifelong Cub fan. He kept saying he's 93 now. He kept saying, "I've got to live long enough to see them win a pennant."
And he did. And
And
he
he
did.
did. And my Uncle Wayne did not, and it was so sad.
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry to hear that.
So I wanted to tell everybody that once again we've been speaking with Rick Kaempfer, author of Back in the DDR and Every Cub Ever, and several other books in German and in English. So you did some translation work? Was that what the book in German was?
That's a book about a German soccer club here in Chicago that my father founded. And so, a lot of that, all the paperwork they gave me about the history of that club was in German.
Mm,
So
mm.
and I speak German, so it worked out perfectly.
Are you a soccer player?
I was a soccer player. I'm 60 now, so I'm no longer a soccer player, but yes.
So, as always, I'd like our listeners to know that this podcast is brought to you by the Museum of the American Military Family and Learning Center. The museum's podcasts are supported in part by New Mexico Arts, the New Mexico Humanities Council, Sandia Area Credit Union, and organizations like Military Brat Seal and Military Brats Registry. And today we've had Rick on the show. It's been interesting. It's been fun. Thanks, Rick.
Thank you. I appreciate it very much.